Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our 12th and final North Carolina Governor's Working Group on Veterans, Service Members, and their families for the year 2021. Wonderful that all of you could join us here today, and we are looking forward to examining part 4 of our 5-part series on the social determinants of veteran suicide. Today we have a wonderful expert panel and moderator that are going to walk us through how the social determinants and psychological challenges affect housing and relationship and financial stability. I am absolutely delighted to introduce Mr. Michael McGuire from UNC School of Social Work. Mike has been working with veterans programs and military programs for quite some time, and he is always just a breath of fresh air in examining these very painful subjects. And he's made me rethink the way I look at several things. So I'm grateful for his moderation skills today. Our expert panelists promise to be some of the best we've had of the year. We are delighted to have Kevin Rumley from the Asheville-Buncombe Veterans Treatment Court. And another wonderful thing about Kevin is he's also a Marine. Likewise, another great Marine is Ivy Day Johnson from the Kernersville Healthcare Center. And she will be assisting us to talk through this subject as well. Last but certainly not least is an old friend of the Governor's Working Group is Dr. Eric Elbogen, and he works for the National Office for Homeless Veterans and does his research working with the VA Medical Center and Duke University. And we are delighted to have him help us examine this very challenging topic. So if we can welcome them aboard. Thank you so very much for joining us. Mike, are you there, sir?
I am here, ready and willing, Jeff. Thank you for the invitation and having me here today.
It's absolutely our pleasure. So, Simran, if we could go to the next slide, please. All right. Dr. Elbogen, would you like to start us out with a brief presentation that will help inform our ongoing conversation, sir?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you. It's an honor to be here. And today I'm going to just talk a bit about financial well-being and suicide risk in veterans. So one of the things, I started running money management groups for veterans at the Durham VA in 2007. And it quickly dawned on me that a lot of veterans, the first time they were paying a light bill or doing a budget, they were in their 30s. That's over a decade after their civilian counterparts. And what was sad is, unfortunately, predatory lenders know that. And once I started looking into it, turns out that the largest concentration of payday lenders and predatory lenders reside and they're in zip codes near military bases. And so then it's not surprising that service members are much more likely than civilians to take out payday loans. They're actually more likely to incur credit card debt. And that has real impact for veterans on their credit ratings over the course of their lives. That's in addition to requiring retraining to transfer work skills from the military to civilian work. Multiple deployments could affect family financial well-being. So I began to be interested in, well, what is the impact of this? And so we've shown that it actually, veterans who have financial problems are more likely to become homeless, but also a lot of research, mine and others, has shown that it does relate to suicide risk. So Brian et al. Showed that within 24 hours of crisis, active duty, like a quarter had a financial stressor. We found that we did a national study of post 9/11 veterans, and veterans who said they didn't have enough money to cover their basic needs were triple the risk of suicide ideation 1 year later. compared to those that veterans who could cover their basic needs. Now, that's as consistent with meta-analysis. That's a review of all studies. And that's not just veterans, it's non-veterans. And this is something that's known in that is a suicide risk factor and a social determinant of suicide in the general population too. So next slide. So there's some animation that you're not going to see here, but I'll explain what this slide is we actually looked at over 1,000 veterans, and we looked at whether or not they had protective factors in their lives. And so the 0 through 8 on the bottom is the number of protective factors. And this is a nationally representative sample of veterans. And one of the things I want you to keep note of is that most veterans have most protective factors. And I think that's really speaks to the strength of the veteran population, because you could see 281, 227, you're talking about very few who have very few protective factors. And on the left side is the chances that 1 year later, they felt suicidal. And what you would see is there's that ball, and it would actually bounce all the way down to from the 0 to the 8. And that's a 92% reduction in suicide if veterans have work, social support, self-determination. Actually, the one item, do you feel most in control of your life, was one of the strongest protective factors for veterans. Resilience, not being homeless. So financial stability occurs not in a vacuum, but in the context of someone's social, spiritual, and psychological well-being. And that's what this really shows, is that the more protective factors veterans have, the less their risk of suicide. And so the other thing to take away from this is you're going to hear from other speakers about how they're helping veterans get those protective factors in their lives and move to the right of that screen. And that's what we can be doing. I know that's what the governors group's been doing too. So this is data that shows the how that really translates to reduced suicide risk. Next slide. And this is both of these were published last year, and this is actually the general population. And what we showed is that similarly, people adults in the general population who had financial stress, history of homelessness, unemployment, and were below the median income, they had a 20 times higher chance of attempting suicide in the next 3 years compared to those that didn't. And that's in the general population. So, so really this underscores how important this social determinant is to look at. Next slide. We've developed an intervention for this, and there's a lot of resources that are available at the VA. If you type in VA veterans discounts, they have a list of veterans discounts. There are budgeting forms. There's information on avoiding scams. The military, the DoD, has Office of Financial Readiness, has excellent resources, and a mobile app called Sense that is really good to know about. Next slide. And so we did a study and showed that actually helps veterans once they start using financial literacy skills. It translated to better savings. So I'm going to conclude by saying this, is that what our research began to show is that when veterans are in the military, they have employment, they have a job, they have the unit for cohesion, there's the mission, there's direction, their basic needs are covered, there's living stability. And paradoxically, when transitioning to the community, the carpet is swept out. And suddenly a veteran needs to find a job, find their own social support, find self-direction, pay their own bills and achieve that living stability. And so I think that that's what that figure that I just showed you is about developing those protective factors, which includes financial stability, is really a critical part of the community success for veterans. And I think you're going to be hearing a lot about how those protective factors are put into place by the other speakers. So I'll end there. And please, I think you're typing in questions, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Elbogen. Ivy, you ready to share with us some of your initial insights, ma'am?
I sure am. And first of all, I want to say thank you very much for inviting me here today. Definitely what we're talking about in terms of veterans are very important. If we could go to the next slide, please. I want to start off my presentation by reading this statement because I'll be focusing on mental health, specifically substance use disorders. And I think this statement sets us up to talk about this a little bit more today. So to effectively treat and ultimately prevent mental illness and substance use disorders, psychiatrists and other mental health professionals must carefully evaluate the role that non-genetic, social, and environmental factors play in bringing about poor mental health and in causing worsening mental illness. In doing so, we must consider the roles of social justice, political will and power, policy action, resource distribution, and program development and implementation in addressing these factors. I work with veterans in a direct practice. I work with them specifically in substance use, but I do know that mental health is a comorbidity along with substance use. So I want to kind of look a little bit here now in terms of veterans and substance use and suicidality. This chart shows where in the light blue, these are persons who have not, or veterans who have not used substance, and in the green is veterans who have used substance or have a substance use disorder. And in looking at the first serious thoughts, or we call it suicidal ideations, look at the difference between a veteran experiencing who does not use substance in comparison to a veteran who has been using substance. And I should go back and clarify, when I say substance use, I think the old terminology was drug use. And in terms of talking about that, I am talking about in terms of consumption of alcohol, using marijuana, could be cocaine, could be methamphetamines, benzos such as Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, and some of these substances too that I'm talking about are prescription medication. You know, some people are prescribed Xanax and other types of prescription medication. So it could be substance that you can buy legal, like alcohol. It could be substance that is prescribed, or it could be substance that is bought illegally on the streets too. So that's, in terms of talking about substance use, I want to kind of clarify that a little bit. Now, if we look at this second column, these are veterans who, once again in the light blue, who have not used substance compared to the one in the green who has used substance. In terms of not only having thoughts about suicide, but also making a plan of how they would do it. And look at the comparison of that. That's almost double, close to triple. So if a veteran has been using substance, then their ability, or they're at a place where they're making plans about taking their life compared to a veteran who is not. And then the actual attempt in the last column, the difference between a veteran using substance and a veteran who's not using substance. And with this particular research through SAMHSA, they were looking at veterans ages 18 years and older. They did not break it down into gender or anything of that nature. But substance use makes a big difference when we talk about suicidality with veterans. And we could go on to the next slide. There's some stats that I also want to go over in terms of veterans who do use substance and kind of some of the outcomes for them. So mental illness and substance use, and I mentioned earlier, they are comorbidity, is relatively common among military veterans. 7% of veterans struggle with illegal drug use compared to 5.3% of the general population, and once again, this is over the age of 18. 80%, and we're talking about veterans, struggle with alcohol abuse, and 7% have an issue with both alcohol and illegal drugs. And it's not unusual for a veteran to maybe use alcohol along with maybe marijuana use, or could be cocaine use, or some other type of substance use. 7% of the veteran population has serious mental illness compared to 14.4% of adults over 18. And in talking about that too, it is not unusual for a veteran to have a mental illness and maybe use alcohol or another substance to kind of self-medicate those symptoms. An example would be a veteran with PTSD who maybe is having difficulty sleeping or getting to sleep, may very well use alcohol to kind of help them relax, or marijuana to help them relax or wind down so they are able to go to sleep. Marijuana and psychotropic drugs, psychotherapeutic drugs are the most common abused by veterans. And then they have a large number of veterans that misuse prescription pain relievers, and I think we've all kind of seen the news about the opioid epidemic and what's going on not only with veterans but the general population. And then the last one, 10% of veterans between the ages of 18 and 25 misuse prescription pain relievers. And once again, we're talking about the opioid epidemic that is it is very prevalent and has kind of ravaged nationally in our societies. Can we go to the next slide? So here, because I do work directly with veterans and specifically for substance use disorders, I just wanted to make you all aware of some programs that the VA has that they are using, and definitely can be considered protective factors to help veterans with their substance use disorders. So some of the evidence-based treatment modalities, and when I say evidence-based, these treatment modalities have been researched, replicated, and for validity, and shown to be effective in the treatment of substance use disorders. They include cognitive behavior therapy, and it can be done individually, or it could be done in a group setting. And you'll note on my slide too, almost any individual treatment, we can also bring family in at different points in time, because we have learned over time that when you treat a veteran, you just can't treat the veteran in isolation. If the veteran has a family, you need to incorporate them in the sessions, of course with the veteran permission, but most of the time they definitely want family to kind of understand what they're going through and what type of support they need in order to live a more better, well-adjusted life. There is behavioral couples therapy, and these are couples that I work with. In this situation, one or both in the relationship can have a substance use disorder, and they will be treated. And these couples can also be done in a group setting too. We have cognitive processing therapy. This is for PTSD, but also for substance use disorder. So if a veteran does have PTSD and they also have a substance use disorder, this treatment will be effective for both of them. And then the last one is integrative cognitive behavior therapy, which is very short term, and we kind of use it a lot to kind of complement someone who's already in a substance use group. So that can kind of, maybe they need a little bit more treatment than some others in the group, so that can be pull-out sessions for them. I also want you to know that these treatments can be done in person or virtually too. So if a veteran has transportation issues, or maybe not a driver's license or whatnot, not able to get to the VA, we most certainly can provide these virtually. And the last thing I want to leave you all is that, like I said, we are focusing on a macro level today. And when we talk about macro and trying to help veterans with some of the issues that they are experiencing, some of which definitely make them more at risk for suicidal type behavior, then understand that we have to look at it on a community, state, national, and sometimes even international levels if we're looking to have some positive outcomes for veterans who are, and I'm going to say, suffering with a lot of type of social determinants. Other roles to that can be helpful in this is definitely researchers, because if there is a social issue, then we definitely need some research to kind of zero in and find out exactly what the problem is. Once that is identified, we definitely need some programs to address it. We need policies too, sometimes to show how these programs will work, but also think in terms of funding. And then we also have to have persons advocating on a macro level to make sure that these things are put into place.
Ivy, thank you so very much, ma'am. We'll look forward to seeing you again in a moment. As soon as we hear from our guest from the West, Mr. Kevin Rumley. Kevin, please, sir.
Hey, thank you, Jeff, and it's an honor to be here again. So I know Ivy's already touched on a lot of the veteran backdrop, so I won't spend too long on this, but we are seeing more and more traumatic brain injuries with the OEF population. Here in my role with the justice system and diversion from the justice system, we are seeing high rates of substance misuse and post-traumatic stress disorder. And in Buncombe County, here in the West, we have about 19,000 veterans, the highest rate of veteran homelessness in the entire state. You can go to the next slide. More information, and I know those in the community are seeing this. 20% of veterans with PTSD have a substance use diagnosis. We're seeing high rates of binge drinking, which is a maladaptive coping strategy. 1 out of every 3 veterans seeking VA treatment for substance use disorder has post-traumatic stress disorder. And let's see, also worth noting, 1 in 10 returning soldiers seen in the VA have a problem with alcohol or other drugs. So this is a pertinent issue. And in my lived experience, as Eric mentioned earlier, this idea of feeling in control of your life, as a person in long-term recovery and a combat wounded veteran, I always struggled to find a sense of control. I felt like I had no control, and thus I had no hope. So we see here, you can go to the next slide. This is a quote by Bessel van der Kolk. He says, the single most important issue for traumatized people is to find a sense of safety in their own bodies. He talks that all human suffering beyond that of an organic nature is related back to trauma, this inability to self-regulate and an inability to create meaningful relationships with other people. And safety in the body is interesting because when you have a trauma response, your brain goes offline, your executive function, your ability to connect with another human being it's just not there. It's not possible. So the neuroscience supports this, and my lived experience supports this, also working with these veterans. You can go to the next slide. But I really am excited because we are trying to reframe this idea of healing. Oftentimes we talk about healing as this binary. You're either healed or you're suffering, or you're either in recovery or you're an addict. But what we know is that it's actually a continuum. And there are, as this author Resmaa Menakem says, there are many points along this continuum. More often, healing and growth take place on a continuum with innumerable points between utter brokenness and total health. So the last slide here, something that we're incorporating into our Veterans Court is this idea of recovery capital. And it is just protective factors. These are the dimensions of wellness that we are looking at in a veteran's life. And we can say, hey, if this area is kind of lacking, maybe you don't have financial resources, financial security. We know that your recovery is going to be in jeopardy, and we know that your risk of suicidal ideations are higher. So I just wanted to put this out there to the community It's Recovery Capital by William White. And it covers a broad swath of things: transportation, a safe neighborhood. I have an intimate partner who's supportive of my recovery. So all of these dimensions together contribute to really transformation and healing.
Kevin, thanks so very much. Now comes maybe the best part of the whole event. Mike McGuire is going to lead us through a guided conversation on how to connect these dots and stitch all of this together to have a better understanding of how we can help and what upstream interventions look like. Mike, thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, you bet. First, let me just check my audio. Am I loud enough? Sound okay? Terrific. Okay. For the three of you, thank you so very much for sharing just a slice of your expertise, a slice of your work with us. And I actually wanted to start just with what's facing all of us each day right now, and that's the pandemic. And Eric, I'll put you on the spot here. I saw online just over a year ago in the journal Medical News Today, they had you quoted, and you can tell us if it was an accurate quote, but it said, although the ultimate impact of COVID-19 is still unknown, it is all but certain that the longer infections spread, there will likely be more people who will experience significant financial strain resulting from work stoppages and disruption. You said that over a year ago. See how prophetic you are here. It's still in front of us. We're still fighting this. In some ways, no end in sight. What has been the implications? And I'll ask for a few folks, but I want to start with Eric. What have been the implications of this ongoing pandemic around particularly financial stress, or perhaps I should say financial distress?
Yeah, I think there's a few things that come to mind. I mean, I think one thing is that we actually did do a survey during the pandemic, and we've published it, looking at suicidal thoughts, thoughts of self-harm in the general population, and included veterans. And we did show that, in particular, food insecurity, not meeting basic needs, and being worried about being evicted. Those are all worries during the pandemic. And I think the veterans were, they also had concerns about those in the survey. And so those are still, that is, it's ongoing. And I think that's to the extent that there are a lot of risk factors and social determinants that interact with one's finances and abilities. But it is like what Kevin said, and Ivy, if someone is getting help and feels a sense of control over their life, and they're able to take advantage of treatments that are available, I think that that's going to protect. I think that to the extent that the COVID pandemic, whether it's with finances or others, make us feel less in control, that's of concern.
Thank you, Eric. And Ivy, from your clinical window, what have you seen, if any, the specific impact of the pandemic?
Well, one of the biggest things that kind of hit us was that we could no longer, at least initially, we were not able to see veterans in persons for our groups for substance use disorders. And that was very hard on a lot of veterans, because part of treatment, especially in a group setting, is the camaraderie. And being in person, sometimes they would meet before group or after group, talking. So we wasn't able to do that. We did go virtually, and that definitely helped. But I hear all the time from veterans, when are we going to be able to meet again in person? Virtual, fine, we'll do that for right now, but we want to be able to see each other and just kind of interact that way, in-person interaction. So that is one of the biggest pieces that we've had to try to overcome because of the pandemic. I don't know, Mike, I probably did I answer your question all the way?
Yeah, you sure did. I mean, it certainly begs the question, how well can online, it has certainly some benefits. It can cover a lot of territory. I mean that literally. Yet how well can that replicate this sense of belonging, this sense of connectedness? Kevin, how about you? From your eyes at treatment court, have you all had to move to a partial online format, or how else has this pandemic impacted your work and the veterans you work with?
Yeah, thanks, Michael. The veterans are definitely feeling the impact of online treatment. And it's amazing that we have this resource, that the services have continued with the VA, which is where our veterans receive their treatment. But there's something to be said, as Ivy highlighted, for everything that happens around that hour-long or hour-and-a-half session. Those small conversations, these pro-social relationships, those are really meaningful, and those aren't happening. So we as organizations have to work harder to create environments for relationships to blossom that aren't just, this is treatment, this is the modality you're working through. In my experience too, when I have gone to treatment throughout the years for post-traumatic stress, depression, for addiction, my relationships that I created there, a lot of the healing happened extra therapeutically. It was everything outside of it. So I think, Michael, that is a challenge, as Ivy said, in isolation. We're just seeing more veterans. We have older veterans that are Vietnam era, and they're just saying, I don't want to risk it. I don't want to go out. And we already have a propensity to isolate. So it just compounds it all.
Kevin, you mentioned extra therapeutically, and I got a hunch that the veteran population will map onto the civilian population, or the population at large, which more or less suggests that it's in terms of impact of outcomes, the greatest impact is nearly always outside of the actual treatment modality. That's just one small slice in a person's life. So I begin to wonder, should our treatment modality simply include extra therapeutic variables? And I wonder how you all see that. What is our role as providers? And I know the audience here is from a lot of different perspectives of providing. How do we, or should we, move beyond, say, our more narrow focus, maybe it's substance use treatment, for example, to thinking about those extra therapeutic psychosocial variables? What's our role in that? Up for grabs.
I'd love jump in here, because that is the great challenge with our population. They're high risk, they're high need. They have this kind of lifetime of the maladaptive coping, the substance use and the drinking, which leads to the justice system. And so it's interesting asking veterans, what do you do for fun? That question doesn't ever come up. Like, what do I do for fun? Well, I go to treatment. I have to meet with my probation officer. I have to come meet with the judge. I have to get my urinalysis. Yeah, but what do you do for fun? And it's this whole arena that a lot of the veterans I interact with, and I'd be interested if Ivy and Eric are seeing this, but when there's so much suffering, so much lost sense of control in your life, the idea of fun and joy is far removed. So we've had to, incorporate just outings to get food together, and going to a baseball game, or going to a local sports here, going to a movie in small cohorts. But yeah, I think extra therapeutically, that's a great question.
Thank you, Kevin. Perhaps some other thoughts on that?
Mm-hmm.
Work beyond.
Yes, I would like to jump in. One of the things that we like to do, like I said, for veterans, we've learned you can't treat them in isolation. If they have a family, you have to incorporate that in treatment and with their permission, of course. And most all of them definitely want that to happen, because one of the pieces of it is for family to kind of understand what they're going through. So there's some psychoeducation that needs to go on. Also, another part of all the evidence-based treatments that I know of, there are home assignments, and it could be, you know, Kevin, you were mentioning about a lot of times people don't have pleasure in their life because they're going through so much, they're suffering with so much. Some parts of home assignment can be what in the past have brought you pleasure, and how about if you would try to engage in that before the next session, come back in and kind of tell me how it went, and maybe we can tweak some things and whatnot to get them back out and doing things that they've done in the past that did bring pleasure. So I definitely see that as part of things outside of your typical session, is some things for them to do to help themselves. Because I think the other piece is, you don't want someone becoming dependent on you or just dependent on treatment. If anything, you want to empower them so at some point they can come back and have some kind of normalcy in their life, and that's under their own power versus the therapist or someone else.
I know that's a theme for you, Ivy, in your work that I've followed to some degree, this idea of not working in isolation. So working in groups, working with families. I find that that many of us in the provider field are very hesitant to bring up family and invite family in. There's a nervousness around it if we haven't had that specific training. And I wonder if you or others have some comments to folks that may be nervous to ask that question, to ask the veteran about who do you know that you can bring in, and how do you define family, for example.
Okay, I just want to make sure I give everybody an opportunity. I don't want to just kind of jump in if anybody else would like to come in. Well, I can say for myself, it is always about asking permission first. And if there is a willingness, if they're okay, then it is about who would you like to bring in, because family can be defined, you know, a lot of different ways by a lot of different people too. So who would you like to bring in, and definitely looking at somebody who's going to be supportive of whatever it is that you're trying to do. So just kind of just having that conversation initially. And once they define who they want to bring in, once they define what type of support that they need, then kind of work from there.
Thank you, Ivy. And Eric, I wonder if that is maybe a standard operating procedure in the work that you and others do around financial literacy. Is there kind of standard operating procedure to bring in family loosely defined?
Well, you know, I think one of the things is there are a lot of resources that are available to veterans and family members, and they could be shared. So I think that there's different ways that, and you know, if you're jointly doing a budget together, that's certainly, you know, something that's pretty common that's happened. But you know, I think the other part is of all this is that you know, these mental health, the substance abuse, I think Ivy and Kevin are saying, you know, they don't occur in a vacuum. There's a context, and the social context, and having people who are supportive of their recovery, and a person, a veteran who, you know, they might want to have mental health, you know, address mental health and substance use problems, but also they want to, you know, have a job that they find satisfying, or they want to have a stable home, or other goals that, you know, you could ask a veteran, you know, what would, you know, and how one's social support supports those goals, I think is really, really important. So.
Yeah, thank you. But I sometimes feel almost overwhelmed. I'm thinking, okay, let's say my job is a veteran service officer, or my job is to treat specifically in an opioid use disorder or something along those lines. And targeting that specifically somehow seems doable, maybe not effective, but it seems doable to me. And when I think about, well, there's all these other variables to consider, I can see myself getting frozen, and sometimes do. Like, where do I begin with this person? And I know the staid answer is person-centered. I get that to a certain degree, but help me out a little bit more. What do we do with the veteran that comes in with, sort of presenting problem X, but let's say we really do buy into the research and the experience of these social determinants, and realize that William White's work around all these recovery variables does make sense to us. How do we get there? How do we begin to assess that? Do I start with financial stuff, Eric? Do I start with the probation officer? Do I start with having fun? Do I start with behavioral couples therapy with substance use disorder? How do we get that started? And then I want to go to a comment from one of our participants.
Well, I can chime in here. One of the benefits of a court-ordered program is that we just begin with housing. It's a very immediate requirement of our program. You need to have stable housing, and stable housing could be the Veterans Restoration Quarters here, a 200-bed transitional housing where veterans can stay for 2 years. But it's a address which is substance-free, and we have seen, boom, just with housing, so many other dimensions start to come together. If you don't have stable housing, then how are you going to maintain a calendar? All these kind of things we take for granted in our day-to-day life just don't happen without first housing. And when we see that click, we can do the strengths-based, we can be person-centered, and I think we can do both and. That's what we do here in our court. We meet them where they're at. They're voicing, hey, my number one concern is I need a job. And even though I may be here clinically looking like, well, your number one concern is also, spending X hundred of dollars a month on this, which is disproportionately impacting everything else. We can do that. But I think just going back to this idea of connection, we are in a lot of ways a forced relationship. We have to have this relationship. I am seeing these veterans 3 times a week. We have volunteer mentors, but it's again a tribe. We had a tribe when we were in the military. We had people that we were accountable to our left and to our right, and they knew our names. They would see us, acknowledge us. There was this reciprocity. And so much healing happens just in that process of someone knowing your name, someone saying, hey, I didn't see you yesterday at that NA group. Where were you, Kevin? But I think to answer the question, we start with housing.
We start with housing first. And Kevin, that seems to speak to, like, it's almost like saying safety first. I assume housing means a lot of things to people, but one thing it probably means too is safety. Ivy or Eric, any other thoughts or comments about kind of where to start or how to start?
So for me, the veterans that I see, they've been screened, so they pretty much acknowledge to some degree that there is some type of substance use issue. And a good biopsychosocial assessment is where I begin. And then also asking them about their ideas of treatment goals. What would they like to accomplish? Sometimes the goal is to stop using whatever they're using. Other times it's to reduce it to a level where they feel like it would be manageable. So it's definitely veteran driven about what they think that they need at that point in time, and then for me to assist them to get to whatever the treatment goal is.
Thank you. I've been hearing the word connection come up, either the opposite of isolation or the risk factor, or the protective side of that, of course, being connection. Other thoughts? Anything, Eric?
No, just a lot of similar thoughts about, when Kevin was talking about having a stable home. There's a lot of veterans who, I think, and getting housing. I think there are veterans who have housing, and do they have enough money to afford to cover basic needs like food? There's food insecurity is a very big issue, and housing, transportation, medical care, and I think that just being able to cover basic needs is another factor.
Yeah. This idea that if we're hungry, nothing else matters, right? Yeah. This really falls well, I think, into a comment that we have here from a participant named Brenda, who initially noted that there's no one way that fits everyone, and she mentioned that she appreciates the options that are being offered here, and also says dedicating time for honest conversations around all domains of life may help decipher the needs and the order of impact to prioritize these supports. And then also agreeing that the journey can be overwhelming. So with that, thank you for that, Brendan. Please feel free, folks, if you have a specific question or comment to chat those in, and we'll try to get to them. But with that in mind, are there some screening tools? Ivy, you mentioned the biopsychosocial. I think of that in that sort of broad, generic term. I'm wondering, are there some screening tools that any of you use specific to protective factors, maybe specific to protective factors around suicidality?
Yes, there's a basic Columbia screening for suicidality, and if it scores positive, then there's a comprehensive evaluation that we will do, and then along with that a safety plan too, and then to look at where the veteran is. Do they need immediate hospitalization, or is it something that maybe they can be part of the suicide prevention program? So there's lots of options with that, but definitely screening is definitely part of it, and if there is a positive, then definitely automatically there will be a comprehensive evaluation, and whatever services needs to be put in place at that point in time, they will be.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. Other comments, maybe specific to the protective factors as well?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, mine is very quick. It's bouncing off what Ivy just said. I think in terms of, and if it hasn't been mentioned, but it will, the Veterans Crisis Line will do, you should definitely be aware of that if you're not, and that they could help connect veterans to tons of resources, and also do screenings and such.
Thank you, Eric. Kevin?
We've done a lot of work too, and the governor's working group has promoted this idea of asking the question, being direct, because it is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable to ask a veteran if they're having thoughts of suicide, having thoughts of killing themselves. And because it's uncomfortable, we kind of shy away from it. So I really applaud the work of the governor's working group, raising that as an important issue. It's something that isn't a one and done. It's not ask them at the intake, do the biopsychosocial, and all right, well, we know he's not suicidal ever, we're good. Because risk does increase depending on how many prior attempts an individual's had. So we routinely ask that of our veterans as they go throughout our program, including at phase changes. We have 5 different phases that a veteran goes through in each benchmark. And part of that is asking about any suicidal ideations. Have they had these thoughts? But again, just being direct with that question is really important.
And Kevin, as a follow-up, being direct with that question, there's often the term one's tribe is used in describing those that are directly affiliated, that are direct service members. Well, for folks that are not part of the tribe, if you will, many of the folks that will be watching this today or the recording won't necessarily have been in the military or are not currently in the military. How does that change the landscape in trying to connect if what we're trying to do is avoid isolation and make connection? And we know that many of our service members, if they're connected to one service, they're connected with many services. So there are a lot of opportunities, a lot of touch points along the way. What can anyone do, especially those, in this case, my question is around those not from or of the military?
Well, I can say as a Marine, I appreciate the genuine curiosity that has come from non-service members. And in some ways, I have to be extra mindful that my experience is not this other veteran's experience. So for the non-veteran population, I think just being that unconditional positive regard, that support, and really what was your experience? What is your experience? Because every veteran is different and veterans aren't this monolith. And so it is just wanting to learn more. And for that, I really appreciate the civilian realm.
Yeah, that's an interesting take. I've heard that with other perspectives with other issues, this idea of not having the lived experience. While there's a downside to that, perhaps, there can be an upside, which is, hey, I don't know, so just tell me. I don't come in with that preconceived notion. You're going to have to let me know. Yeah, thank you for that reframe, frankly. Yeah. I wonder if we can move to this concept of upstream. As I was thinking, looking at some of the other recordings, there was a lot of conversation about whether we're intervening upstream, midstream, downstream. Let me talk about upstream for a minute. And Eric, I want to run back to you talking about predatory lending. In my brief time working as a consultant for the military, not of the military, not within the service branches. In Ramstein, the mall there on base had, I would think, not only around it in the outskirts, but right in the mall, there was Camaros and Harleys and a few Mustangs. And if you walked by and you had a certain look, certainly a uniform on, you were pulled in with the nicest, friendliest people with the greatest smiles that wanted to be your best friend. And a lot of young people were signing on the dotted line. So looking upstream, what can be done or what is being done about predatory lending? We're asking base commanders to say, you know what, I know it's capitalism, but stop selling Camaros to my troops in the mall. Any upstream ideas, Eric, about financial literacy or dealing with financial distress?
Well, I can tell you in the last 10 years, the Department of Defense has created the Office of Financial Readiness. I think it's the last 10 years, but it's definitely also the Transition Assistance Program, TAP program, has a lot in terms of education about finances. So I think upstream, there is a lot that's being done. There's awareness on the part of the military that this is going on. I believe there have also been, Congress has passed more protections for veterans in about 5-6 years ago to prevent that, but it's still, I think to the extent that awareness, but on the part of I think that they're just, it could really have this impact for the rest of one's life if someone is in debt, and if it's specifically near military bases, it's going to disproportionately affect the military population, and veterans. So I do think to the extent that there's more knowledge about that out there, it's a more protection of that. That's the best that we, I think that's definitely in the right direction.
Thank you, Eric. And I have a hunch, or perhaps I even know, that a lot of your research is being used around those conversations. So thank you to you and your colleagues around that. Kevin, anything that you would frame as upstream specific to your work within the criminal justice system? And we may just pause and point out, Kevin, that that I don't believe everyone in North Carolina, certainly not across the country, not all veterans have access to Veterans Treatment Court. Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's accurate. In North Carolina, we have 5 Veterans Treatment Courts, and it is definitely increasing every year. We just got Catawba as the newest Veterans Treatment Court.
Great.
But in Buncombe County, because we are a superior court, we can take a veteran with any charge, a felony level, from any of the 100 counties in North Carolina. But obviously that is a big ask of the veteran to uproot and move here for 2 years. So yeah, there's work to be done, and it takes the entire community. Our Veterans Court is possible because we have a partnership with the VA, because we have a partnership with the District Attorney's Office, Public Defender's Office, and the Administrative Office of the courts. So there's a lot that goes into it. But when I think upstream, because a lot of times the justice system is the end of this journey, or when I think of it, right, this behavior has been going on, these maladaptive coping skills, which then lead to the justice system. And here we are. There's so many intervention points. And I'm a big advocate of harm reduction. Ivy was mentioning this earlier, and I touched on it in the presentation, that it isn't simply suffering or you're doing great. So one upstream support is medication-assisted treatment or medication for opioid use disorder, including methadone, Suboxone. They have now the monthly injection, which we've seen with our veteran population has been really helpful. And they get the shot once a month at the VA. They don't have to worry about taking the daily pill, and it's a protective factor. And yeah, it's just additional sense of control in a veteran's life. So harm reduction, we're seeing also even needle exchange clinics here in Western North Carolina. We're seeing these hubs where an individual that is an intravenous IV drug user, they can come receive clean needles, but they're also then interfacing with case managers and getting access to resources, connection to dental, healthcare, everything. So those are small kind of upstream things that I have in mind.
Yeah, small but so large. I mean, harm reduction seems to be sort of mushrooming. It's been around for so long, but it's getting a lot of attention right now and some funding, as you mentioned. And I got to wonder if safer consumption or safer use sites are in the makings for North Carolina someday. Certainly some pros and cons to that debate. Ivy, anything that comes to your mind regarding the phrase upstream?
I just think, as a provider, at the VA, continue getting all providers, clinicians certified in evidence-based treatment, because obviously if we're going to provide treatment, we want it to be the most effective treatment, and a lot of it is time limited, so you only have so much time. So being able to provide that to veterans and their families, I think is part of, so a continuation of that I see as being that, one of the ways that is being helpful to veterans. And substance use disorder itself is a risk factor for suicidality. So treatment, being actively participating in treatment, can be seen as a protective factor. So to have all that available to veterans when they are ready to engage, I think is just a good point. And definitely also having providers or clinicians there to provide it to. So that's the other piece. But I just see a continuation of that, and I know there is a push to continue, getting clinicians and providers certified in evidence-based treatment to provide to veterans.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. I know that you're certified in several of those evidence-based modalities that you use at the VA. And of course, Kevin brought in another evidence-based modality, which is medication, and not so much assisted treatment, just medication, like medication for opioid use disorder, standalone. We're coming close to an end here. I wanted to go upstream with one more thought, and this came from a veteran named Ron Self, who I believe is still incarcerated in San Quentin, if I understand that correctly, but nonetheless is running an organization. It's called Veterans Healing Veterans from the Inside Out, and he is pitching this idea that you have boot camp to get into the military. Why not boot camp to get out of the military? Boot camp in, boot camp out. This idea that he uses this metaphor of you wouldn't use an old 60-ton tank and suddenly just repurpose it to be a school bus. Same with our veterans. We don't take them from being downrange and then suddenly expect them to I don't know, drive the school bus, what have you. But instead of boot camp out, I wonder if there's just any thoughts about this idea of doing more for veterans as they're transitioning back into civilian life, perhaps even a boot camp out. While I don't think would be a favorite amongst all veterans, I wonder about the idea.
Just from my personal experience when I separated from the military, I was lucky enough, and I say lucky because I've heard from a lot of veterans who they didn't have this opportunity was to go through SEPs, and they prepared me to transition back into civilian society after 13 years in the Marine Corps. So I was lucky enough to go through a program, and that lasted, I want to say, 3 weeks, and I was actually overseas when I went through it. And it took, not only did it prepare me, but they told me everything I needed to do to include getting connected to the VA. So I've definitely heard from veterans who've not had that opportunity. And definitely, I think every person leaving the military, no matter what type of discharge you get, you should be able to go through that.
Yeah, thank you, Ivy. Yeah. Other thoughts on that?
I would echo that. When I was discharged, my pathway was a little different. I was blown up in Iraq, sent to Walter Reed, had 32 surgeries, about a year and a half in the hospital. So I'm separated from my tribe, and I basically was given a bag full of opioids and said, good luck. And it didn't end up going so well for many years. I am happy to hear that a lot of changes have been made to that separation process, which we know has been long needed. But even veterans that have been in the community for a long time and had that transition still struggle. So I'm really interested in peer supports that can walk with veterans through that role, that can simply take a veteran to the VA and spend a day with them and go through the onboarding process. And I like that idea of a boot camp out. Maybe I would change the name, because if I had to do boot camp again to get out, I may not.
That's a great point. Yeah, it needs some rebranding, I think. Peer support sounds a lot nicer than boot camp, that's for sure. Jeff, I see a hand up. Did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, Mike, thanks so much. I've been thinking about the presenters, and several of them have brought up prevalence of TBI and blast injuries amongst former service members after this last series of wars. And I was just wondering if reduced impulse control as it relates to TBI had some measure in difficulties these folks are having in maintaining sort of a sobriety and financial readiness condition.
I know when it comes to substance use, definitely we have a fair number of veterans who do have TBIs, and once again, the self-medicating piece, also the impulsivity piece with veterans with TBI. So we definitely see that, and definitely that's a risk factor, can be a risk factor for suicidality too.
And with respect to your second question, Jeff, we did show that veterans, post 9/11 veterans who TBI or PTSD or major depressive disorder had reported lower financial satisfaction and reported more troubles meeting basic needs.
And it does connect with the justice system, for sure. The lack of impulse control and distress tolerance. That's a big focus of a lot of the evidence-based interventions that we're using, and including moral recognition therapy, which is really focusing on kind of criminogenic thinking, but also slowing down those automatic responses, having the ability to move forward with intention, which can be really challenging with traumatic brain injuries. And another thing I find that is important for us is a traumatic brain injury can present in so many different ways that it's easy to interpret behaviorally as if they are unruly or can't get with the program, when it is actually a brain injury that is shaping their perception completely differently. So we're always mindful of how we're responding as a program, and are we criminalizing, stigmatizing, shaming what is really this condition, which is the traumatic brain injury.
Yeah, Kevin, then you overlay PTSD on top of that, and you have yet more kind of blaming, shaming that's really secondary to a condition. Yeah, thank you. Let's wrap up. A theme today kept bubbling up, which seemed to be about, if we look at it from the deficit side, it's isolation. From the protective factor side, we could call that connection of some kind. And it reminded me of a podcast I listened to fairly recently, specific to veteran suicidality. And the person, and the name is escaping me, but the person said, and I think this is accurate, genuine connection prevents suicide. Genuine connection prevents suicide. So powerful statement for one. But I wonder if we could end with this idea that maybe we touched on earlier, and even one of the participants in the audience touched on this. There's so many different ways of helping the person across from us, if you will. And there's so many different touch points that many of the veterans, of course, most don't have touch points within the VA at all, but many veterans have a lot of touch points, including the VA. We can all do something to help with that connection. Can you offer a word of a suggestion? Word of advice might be too strong, but a suggestion for all of us that are listening to the three of you, and as you share your expertise and experience, what's a suggestion or what's a message to leave for us to think about as we tomorrow or later today are speaking with a veteran, because we are one of those touch points? What's a message for we, the audience? And maybe I'll go in order here, and I understand you're on the spot. Feel free to pass if you've already said your message or you have a different kind of comment. That's okay too. But Eric, you let us off. Something to wrap up with?
Yeah, I mean, I think, and this is because this is what I study, I think that there are a wealth of financial resources and tools available for veterans, and that could really, I think that a lot of veterans don't know about them, and to the extent that you're able to access them, you could save money every day, and that translates to feeling, and one of the other themes feeling a little bit more in control of your life. And so I think that accessing those financial tools that are there would be one of many things to do.
Thank you, Eric. And I believe in your slide deck, those were active links that you included, if I remember correctly. I don't know.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, they were. They were.
Yeah. Okay. And we have access to them somehow. Maybe. Okay.
Yeah.
Terrific. And Ivy, you were second in line here. I wonder if you could offer a message as we get ready to transition out.
Sure. You know, I'm a veteran who works at the VA. I love my job. I love working with veterans. I want veterans to know the VA is there for them. That's our sole mission, is to serve veterans. Whether you were in 6 months or 30 years, it doesn't matter. These are your services, and I encourage you to take advantage of that. Come. I'm sure we have something here that we can provide to you. So we're just here for you. And for family members and friends, encourage them to come. At least give us a try and see. So we're here.
Think of that Oldsmobile commercial. We're not your father's VA. You know, come see us again. Yeah. Thank you, Ivy. Kevin.
I always go to Sebastian Junger. I love his book Tribe. He has a quote: "Humans don't mind hardship. In fact, they thrive on it. What they mind is not feeling necessary." And modern society has really perfected the art of making people not feel necessary. And I think just being present, keeping that beginner's mindset, really goes a long way in just honoring someone else's humanity.
Yeah, Kevin, powerful words, and thank you. Feeling necessary, having a purpose. The military gives somewhat singular purpose, and suddenly that purpose is gone, and perhaps something needs to fill. If there is a void, something needs to fill that void. And the least we can do is be present, which is not so easy in today's world. But be present. It kind of takes a village, if you will, to help someone. So thank you, Kevin. That's a wrap on my end. I just want to thank each of you, Eric and Ivy and Kevin, for all that you do for veterans and for making time today to share some of that expertise and have I think a robust conversation where I certainly learned a lot. And I know that our viewers will too. An absolute honor for me to be here, and Jeff and the Governors Institute, I cannot thank you enough, not only for allowing me to be here, but to offer this series, which I know is being seen far and wide, well beyond even the constraints of the state of North Carolina. Thank you, Jeff.
Well, Mike, thank you so very much, sir, and all of our panelists. I'd like to thank you for really showing up and bringing a rousing discussion of these very intense and frequently misunderstood theories and events, and helping us to kind of distill them to their most basic level, which is help each other out and be there for folks. So thank you all for being there for us and the audience of the Governor's Working Group. And I wish all of you in our audience some very happy holidays. I've got a few closing notes here. And we certainly hope that everyone will join us next month on January the 27th, I believe it is, for our first Governor's Working Group of the new year. There will be some changes, but it will still be the same great group. We're looking to getting back together again, in person, hopefully, COVID willing. I would like to very personally say a fond farewell to Colonel Martin Falls, who has long been one of our co-chairs and advocates for the Governor's Working Group. Hopefully he will enjoy his retirement. And after 40 years of serving our country and our veterans, just the greatest admiration for his service and very best wishes. Likewise, I would love to wish my boss, Dr. Michelle Laws, the very best in her new endeavors as she moves on from DHHS. So stay tuned to see who will be our next participant on the working group from Department of Health and Human Services. Our very good friend, Crystal Miller, will be rejoining us next month to continue emceeing the governor's working group and the fine job she does from her new post with Charlotte-Mecklenburg Veteran Services. And I would just like to thank all of you, each and every one of you, for your continued hard work in supporting the governor's working group and the work you do every day. And I look forward to seeing all of you again in the future soon. So thanks so very much, and happy holidays, everyone.